My daughter said someone was sleeping in her treehouse. I assumed it was a kid until I climbed up there. My daughter Mira is 8 years old. She has a treehouse in the back corner of our yard, built into a maple tree by the previous owner. For weeks, Mira had been telling us that someone was sleeping in her treehouse at night. We thought she was making it up. My husband and I had explained that it was probably just a squirrel, or that she had been dreaming. Mira kept insisting. One Saturday morning, she came inside holding a paper bag with 2 empty cookie wrappers, a folded napkin, and a small black notebook. She had found them in her treehouse. The napkin was from a diner across town. The cookie wrappers were not the kind we keep in our house. The notebook had names and dates written in cursive across the first page. I climbed up the ladder that afternoon. The treehouse is small. There is barely room for 2 children. Tucked into the corner under the window was a folded sleeping bag, a man's gray jacket, a half-empty water bottle, and a small camp pillow pressed flat from use. None of it belonged to Mira. The footprints and the dust on the floor were adult-sized. My daughter's pink plastic tea set had been pushed against the wall to make space for the sleeping bag. We stopped letting Mira play in the backyard alone after that. That night, I checked the locks twice. I stood in Mira's doorway listening to her breathe until I could not feel my feet. The man had been sleeping 5 steps from her bedroom window for weeks. My husband wanted to call the police. I told him to give me one night first. With the lights off, I sat by the back window of our upstairs bedroom. The first hour was easy. The second was harder. By 10 o'clock, every shadow in our yard looked like a person. At 10:24, a man walked through the gap in the fence between our house and the neighbor's yard. He climbed the treehouse ladder with the slow movements of someone who had done it many times. The next morning, I waited at the base of the tree before sunrise. My husband stood at the kitchen window with his phone in his hand. The man came down at 5:40. He froze when he saw me. He looked to be in his 50s, thin, soft-spoken. His name was Edgar. The apologies came out of him before I had even said anything. He had not meant to scare anyone. He just needed a quiet place to sleep some nights. When I asked him where he lived, he pointed at the house next door. His mother's house. Mrs. Faulkner has lived next door for almost 30 years. She is on the neighborhood committee. The church food drive is hers. Everyone smiles when they see her at the grocery store. I walked Edgar back to her porch and rang the bell. Mrs. Faulkner answered in a robe and slippers. When she saw Edgar standing behind me, her face did not change. She told him to get inside. Then she turned to me and asked what I thought I was doing. I told her that her son had been sleeping in my daughter's treehouse for weeks. She told me Edgar was a grown man and could sleep where he pleased. The treehouse had been there since before we moved in, and Edgar had grown up climbing it. I told her that was not how property worked. She told me I should be careful about throwing accusations at families who had been in this neighborhood for 4 generations. Her late husband had been on the county zoning board until 2008. His friends were still there. Then she said something I will not forget. You will not last on this street if you keep stirring up trouble. The last people in your house learned that the hard way. She closed the door. That night I opened the notebook. The first page had names and dates going back to 2019. Different addresses, different streets, the same handwriting. The middle pages were lists of nights Edgar had been locked out of his mother's house. The reasons she gave were on the right side of the page. A neighbor coming for tea, a cousin staying the weekend, a church meeting in the living room. Some of the entries were just one word, mood. The back pages were the worst. Edgar had been writing about money, his monthly check, the amount his mother kept, the amount she gave him for food, the years he had asked for his own bank account and been told no. The last entry was from the previous week. Mrs. Faulkner had told Edgar that the Social Security office did not allow people like him to handle their own money. The next morning, I drove to the county social services office with a notebook in a paper bag. 2 hours later, an adult protective services investigator sat with me in a small room. She was maybe in her 40s, calm in a way that told me she had sat in rooms like this before. I walked her through the notebook page by page, the dates, the locked out entries, the money in the back. She asked a few questions, then looked up and said, his name has come up in our system before. She told me a report had been filed in 2016. A mail carrier had noticed Edgar standing outside in the rain for hours, soaking wet, like he was waiting for permission to go inside. The mail carrier called it in. When the investigator at the time went to the house, Mrs. Faulkner invited her in, offered her something to drink, and explained that Edgar enjoyed being outdoors. He had a key and could come inside whenever he wanted. He was just a little different, and people sometimes misunderstood him. The case was closed. Someone had tried to help him 7 years ago, and Mrs. Faulkner had talked her way out of it like it was nothing. The investigator told me the notebook alone was not enough. They needed Edgar to speak, in his own words. I asked what would happen if he was too scared. She put her pen down. That's usually exactly what happens. She said she would open a case file and schedule a welfare check. When I pulled into my driveway that afternoon, something white was sticking out of my screen door. Church stationery, a little cross at the top. The message was in blue ink with no signature. We heard you've been harassing Mrs. Faulkner. She's done more for this neighborhood than you'll ever know. Mind your own business. I had not told a single neighbor about going to social services. Mrs. Faulkner had been busy. That evening, Cairo and I sat at the kitchen table after Mira had gone to watch her show. He had seen the note. He looked tired. He rubbed the back of his neck and said, what if we just install cameras, take down the treehouse, and move on? I knew he was not being mean. He was worried. We had a kid. We had a mortgage. We had neighbors who had already chosen a side. But I could not let it go. I said, Cairo, that man has been writing down every night his own mother locked him out of the house. For years. I'm not pretending I didn't see that. He sat there looking at his hands. The house was quiet except for the cartoon sounds from the other room. Then he said, then we do it right, but we do it together. I reached across the table and put my hand on his. He squeezed it once. Later that night, I was tucking Mira in when she said, Mom, why did the man in the treehouse look so sad? I sat on the edge of her bed and asked what she meant. She told me that a few weeks ago she had climbed up to the treehouse early in the morning before I was awake. She had seen the sleeping bag and figured out someone was sleeping there. She was not scared. She said the person had moved her tea set really carefully against the wall and had not broken any of the cups. So she left 2 cookies in a paper bag on the treehouse floor because she thought he was hungry. I pulled her close and held her. She did not know who Edgar was. She did not know about the notebook or Mrs. Faulkner or any of it. She just saw a person who looked sad and left him something to eat. And sitting there holding my daughter, I thought about what I had found in that treehouse. Edgar had not taken anything from Mira. Not a toy, not a blanket, not one thing. He had folded his sleeping bag every morning before anyone woke up so Mira would not have to see it. He left no mess. He took no space he did not have to. He was a grown man sleeping in a child's treehouse because his own mother would not let him into the house he had lived in his whole life. And even there, even in the one tiny spot where he could close his eyes and rest, he was trying not to be a problem. He was trying not to take up too much room. I kissed the top of Mira's head and told her the man was going to be okay. I did not know if that was true yet, but I was going to try to make it true. 2 days later, my phone rang while I was folding laundry. It was the APS investigator. Her voice had a careful flatness that told me the news was not going to be what I wanted. Mrs. Faulkner had opened the door with a big smile, set out tea and homemade cake, and Edgar was sitting in the living room in clean clothes watching television. When the investigator asked if he felt safe, he said yes. When she asked about the treehouse, Edgar said he had no idea what she was talking about. He slept in his own bed every night. Mrs. Faulkner told the investigator I had an overactive imagination, and she hoped I would get the help I needed. Without his cooperation, this case is very difficult to move forward, the investigator said. The notebook was still in the file. My statement was still on record, but she could not force Edgar to speak. I sat on the edge of my bed holding my phone. I thought about calling Cairo at work. I thought about driving back to the social services office. I thought about knocking on Mrs. Faulkner's door and telling her I knew exactly what she had done, but none of that would change anything. Mrs. Faulkner had done exactly what she did in 2016. She cleaned Edgar up, put him in front of the investigator like a display, smiled her way through the visit, and made me look like the problem. The next morning, I saw Edgar in Mrs. Faulkner's driveway pulling a trash bag to the curb. When he saw me coming, his whole body pulled tight. His eyes went to the front window of his mother's house. Before I could say anything, he whispered, "Please don't." His voice was so quiet I almost did not hear it. She already took the door off my bedroom. She said it was because of what I did, the treehouse. She said the next time I make her look bad, I won't have a bedroom at all. My chest hurt. Not in a heart attack way. In a way where you hear something so wrong that your body does not know what to do with it. I kept my voice low. I asked if he would talk to the investigator again. Honestly, he shook his head. She controls everything. My checks, my food, my clothes. If I say something, where do I go? He finally looked at me. His eyes were red around the edges. Not from crying, from not sleeping, from being watched in a house with no bedroom door. I'm 53 years old and I don't even have a bank account with my name on it. He swallowed hard. She told me the treehouse was the only thing she couldn't take from me, and now that's gone too. He carried the bag to the curb and walked back inside without another word. I went home and told Cairo everything. He listened, put his coffee mug down slow, and sat back in his chair. Then he said, "So we find him somewhere to go. We can't make him talk, but we can give him a reason to." That afternoon, I called the APS investigator and asked what resources existed for someone in Edgar's situation. She gave me the name of a local nonprofit that worked with adults dealing with financial abuse from family members. I called before I could talk myself out of it. A man picked up on the third ring. His name was Seung. His voice was calm and direct. I gave him the short version. A neighbor in his 50s. His mother controlling his money. His documents locked up. Years of being locked out. Seung said Edgar's situation had a name. Financial exploitation of a dependent adult. More common than most people wanted to believe. Then he said, they've been told for so long that they can't survive alone that they believe it. The cage door is open. They just don't think they can walk through it. He would be willing to meet with Edgar, talk to him, explain what options were out there, but only if Edgar was willing. He said he never forced the conversation. It had to come from Edgar, or it would not mean anything. I told him I understood. I told him I would try. I waited 3 days without pushing. I did not walk over to Mrs. Faulkner's side of the fence. I did not knock on the door. I just kept living my regular life, taking Mira to school, making dinner, sitting with Cairo in the evenings, all while watching that house from the corner of my eye every time I stepped outside. On the fourth night, around 9 p.m., I looked out the back window and saw Edgar sitting on Mrs. Faulkner's back steps, alone, in the dark, just sitting there with his hands hanging between his knees. The kitchen light was on behind him, but the door was closed. He looked like someone who had been set outside and forgotten about. I walked out without turning on the porch light and stepped over the low fence between our yards. I sat down on the steps next to him. He did not look at me. I did not look at him. We sat there with the crickets going and the faint blue glow of a television flickering through Mrs. Faulkner's curtains. After a while, Edgar spoke, low and rough, like he had not used his voice in a while. She used to let me have a dog. Then she said it was too much work. She gave it away while I was at the store. I asked when that was. 2011, he said. I still think about that dog. This man had lost everything one piece at a time. His money, his freedom, his door, his dog. And he remembered the year for all of it because that was all he had left. I told him about Seung. I told him there were people who helped with exactly this kind of situation, that it was not just him. Edgar listened without moving. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "What if she finds out?" His voice cracked on the last word. This was the question that lived under everything. Not whether help existed. Just the fact that his mother had been in control for so long that even thinking about doing something without her knowing felt like stepping off a cliff. I said, "Then we deal with that together." Edgar looked at me then. Really looked at me. Not a quick glance. Not a scared check of the window. He looked at me like he was trying to figure out if I meant it. I held his gaze and I did not look away. Then he nodded. Just barely. But he nodded. The next morning, I was backing out of the driveway when Mrs. Faulkner appeared at the end of the drive. Garden gloves, gray hair pinned up neat, cardigan even though it was warm. She was holding a casserole dish covered in foil and smiling the wide, warm, practiced smile she used on everyone she ever needed something from. "I made too much last night. Thought your family might enjoy it. I took the dish because what else do you do?" It was warm against my palms. She leaned in closer. Her smile did not move, but her eyes changed. They went flat and still, like a light switching off behind glass. "I know you've been talking to my son." Edgar gets confused. He says things that aren't true. "I hope you're not filling his head with ideas that will only hurt him." Then she reached through the window and patted my arm. "I'd hate for your little girl to lose her treehouse over a misunderstanding." She held my eyes for one more second, then straightened up and walked back toward her house. My hands were steady. I noticed that. She had just threatened my daughter's treehouse while handing me a casserole, and instead of making me want to back off, it made me sure. I drove straight to the nonprofit office. Seung was there. I told him what had just happened. He leaned back in his chair and looked at me with an expression that was not surprise. It was recognition, like he had heard this exact story before, just with different names. "That's how you know it's real," he said. "The nice ones are always the most dangerous." 2 days later, Seung sat at my kitchen table across from Edgar. It was a Wednesday morning. Mrs. Faulkner was at her weekly church committee meeting, the same one she never missed, and that was the only reason Edgar had agreed to come. Cairo stood by the front window watching the street. Edgar sat with his hands pressed flat between his knees, making himself as small as possible, glancing toward the front of the house like he expected his mother to walk through the wall. Seung did not pull out a clipboard or anything official. He just sat with a cup of coffee and talked to Edgar like a normal person, not like a case, like a man across from another man who needed someone to listen. After a few minutes, he asked a simple question. "If you could do anything right now, anything at all, what would it be?" Edgar blinked. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I used to work at a garden center. Before my dad died, I was good at it. I knew every plant they carried. I could tell you the soil pH for anything in the greenhouse." He stopped and swallowed. "My mom told me I needed to come home and help her after the funeral. That was 16 years ago." Seung asked if Edgar had any identification. A driver's license, a birth certificate, anything with his name on it. Edgar shook his head. "She keeps all of it. There's a filing cabinet in her bedroom. It's locked. My birth certificate is in there. My social security card. Everything. He said it the way you would describe the weather. Just a fact. Just the way things were. Sung told him they could help him get replacement documents, that his social security money belonged to him and not his mother, that there were programs designed for adults leaving exactly this kind of situation. Edgar listened to every word, then his jaw tightened. She'll say I'm not capable. She'll tell everyone I'm not right in the head. She's been saying it my whole life. Sung looked at him steady. Edgar, do you believe that? The kitchen was so quiet I could hear the clock above the stove ticking. Edgar stared at the table, his fingers curled slowly into loose fists. Then he lifted his head. I kept that notebook for 5 years. I tracked every dollar, every date, every reason she gave for locking me out. Does that sound like someone who can't think straight? I called the APS investigator that afternoon. I told her Edgar was ready to talk for real this time. I told her Sung would be there with him. Sung would be there with him. She came that evening and sat at the same kitchen table with her recorder on the surface between them. This time Edgar spoke. He told her about the money his mother took from his checks each month, the nights she locked the doors, the bedroom door she removed as punishment, the filing cabinet where she kept every document that proved he existed, the years she told him he was not smart enough or strong enough to live on his own. He cried twice. Both times he wiped his face with the back of his hand and kept going. He did not stop. The investigator recorded everything. 3 days later, I was pulling weeds in my front yard when a county car pulled up in front of Mrs. Faulkner's house. The APS investigator stepped out. A second person, a county social worker, got out of the passenger side holding a folder. They walked up the path together. Mrs. Faulkner opened the door with her usual smile, the one she kept polished and ready like a piece of good china. The smile stayed for about 4 seconds. Then I watched it land. The investigator was explaining something. I caught pieces. Formal case, financial exploitation, dependent adult, Edgar's statement, the notebook. Mrs. Faulkner's voice rose loud enough for me to hear across the yard. This is absurd. I have given that boy everything. I kept him safe when no one else would. He doesn't know what he's saying. That woman next door put these ideas in his head. She turned and pointed straight at me. The investigator told her the investigation would proceed regardless. She told her that Edgar had requested his documents be released to him. That was when Mrs. Faulkner's face changed, not to anger, to something I had never seen on her before. Panic. Real, raw panic, breaking through 30 years of careful control like a crack spreading through a wall. He can't leave, she said. Her voice dropped low and small. He's all I have. The investigator and the social worker went inside. They were in there for over an hour. I stood in my yard the whole time. I did not go inside. I did not pretend to weed or check my phone or look busy. I just stood there. When the front door finally opened, the investigator came out first, then the social worker carrying a folder, and then Edgar walked out behind them. He was holding a small duffel bag. He stopped on the porch. Mrs. Faulkner was standing in the doorway behind him. She said his name once, just Edgar, nothing else. He turned around and looked at her. His face was calm, tired, but calm. I love you, Mom, he said, but I can't live like this anymore. Mrs. Faulkner did not answer. She stood there for a moment, then stepped back and closed the door. Edgar stayed in transitional housing for 3 months. Sung helped him open his first bank account. He got a job at a garden center 2 towns over, the same kind of place he used to work before his mother told him to come home. The APS investigator called a few weeks later and told me they had finished going through Mrs. Faulkner's financial records. She had been receiving and controlling over $1,400 a month of Edgar's benefits for more than a decade. One evening in the fall, Mira asked about Edgar while we were eating dinner. I told her the man from the treehouse had found his own place to sleep now. She thought about that for a second, chewing her food, then said, "Good, everyone should have their own bed. The treehouse is still there. Cairo replaced the ladder last month. Sometimes I climb up and sit in the small space where Edgar folded his sleeping bag every morning before anyone woke up. I think about how long a person can survive in a space that small, waiting for someone to notice. The notebook is still in my kitchen drawer. I have never been able to throw it away."